Good evening, midnight listeners, and wanderers of the in-between. Tonight on Murderous Tongues Radio, we descend somewhere quiet, somewhere cold, a place every house pretends not to have. A basement, a boundary, and the thinnest line standing between the living and something patient. This is episode 12, The Salt Line, a story about what we keep out, what we invite in, and the unbearable truth that even the strongest circle breaks eventually. So light a candle if you must, stay inside the circle if you can, and above all, don't ignore the sound coming from the pipes. Welcome back to the dark.
They poured me out of a paper cylinder that read table on one side and pure on the other, as if a brand name could bless a boundary. Their hands trembled. Their breath smelled like river iron and winter apples. The girl holding the container, no, not a girl, the last unbroken thing in a family of two, pinched me between her fingers and let me fall, grain by grain, into a circle on the basement floor. I read it has to be unbroken, she said, voice all sparrow bones. And it has to be salt. Salt keeps things clean. Salt keeps them back. Back. Clean. Unbroken. I remembered every word. I still do. I was made to divide, to keep touch from trespass, breath from silence, to hold a line under a bare bulb that hummed like a tired bee, in a basement that smelled of mildew and old varnish, beneath a house that had learned to sigh when no one asked it to speak. They stepped inside my circle, 3 friends with bad nerves and a thrift store plan. The last unbroken thing with her bottle of salt and a tiny paperback called Opening the Way, in a font that thought too highly of itself. They carried candles in jars, chalk to write names on the stone, and a photograph with corners turned down like obedient ears. The photograph showed a boy waist deep in a river, smiling like sunlight. The river wore him back. The day had been warm. The current had been something else. The town called it an accident because no one wanted to fight the word that wasn't. They set the photograph in my center, where I could taste the starch and the river's old tongue trapped in its paper. Beside it, they placed a ceramic bowl of cloudy water, a small coil of twine, and a matchbook from a bar that had once been a church. "We're not trying to do anything bad," the last unbroken thing said. "We're just trying to speak." The basement listened. The bulb waited. So did the furnace, which took quiet breaths and called them cycles. Under the street, the river turned in its narrow bed, unseen but not absent. They lit their candles and read from the book, words borrowed from older mouths. They spoke the boy's name, and then his name again, softer. They said they kept his room as it was, that they had not moved his shoes, that they were sorry for a fight that had been about nothing, but was now about everything. Tears fell. Tears are a kind of salt too, but they are not a circle. They are not a wall. At first there was only the ordinary theatre of cooling. The air moved a little. The flames trembled because hands did. One friend laughed too loudly and told herself she wasn't afraid. Then the not ordinary, a change in pressure, the way a door wants to open before the knob turns. Silence thickened. The candle flames leaned inward, as if the room exhaled from its walls. The furnace stopped being an appliance and became a throat. They laid the boy's name across me again and again, like a chain across a gate, and I held it, and something else held it on the other side. Not a hand, a sense of hand. My grains tightened. I fused where tears had fallen and dried into scabs. I have no nerves. I felt everything. Are you there? The last unbroken thing whispered. The answer was in the air before it was in the pipes. Damp wood, stubborn current. It knew the name they were using and wept when it said it back. The shape of the voice was close, closer than it should have been. The circle held, because I held. That is what I was for. That is who I was, as far as a line can be someone. The friend with shaking hands reached toward the photograph without stepping. "One knock for yes," she said. The pipes replied. They are always happy to be included. Something pressed where I was thinnest, polite as a visitor at a screen door, not tearing, not clawing, patient in the way only water and certain griefs can be. It hunted forgetfulness the way ants hunt sugar, where a grain had rolled, where a tear had broken me, and I had crusted over. The little book did not say that salt scabs and then breaks. The friends did not see. The last unbroken thing did, or thought she did. She knelt, and her sleeve brushed my edge. I shook, but did not part. I gathered myself. I hardened. A line finds strength in being chosen. A boundary fusses itself into stone when it is believed in. The voice drew closer. For a breath, it was the boy. His words, his easy confidence. And for another, it was the river that had kept him when it should not have. The basement leaned. Chalk names blurred. The last unbroken thing whispered, "Please." And because I taste words as well as hear them, I learned love from the sugar and salt in that sound. "Stay," she begged. I did. The night ended because even the most enterprising grief has to go to work in the morning. They thanked the space as the book instructed. They told whatever listened it had been heard. They blew out the candles until their breath became a faint weather against the glass. They shut off the light. They went upstairs and closed the door and hid the book and the salt and tried to live in a house now divided into before and after, above and below. I remained. That is a thing a line can do. I did not count hours, only moisture and dry, dust and footsteps overhead when someone tried the basement door and then decided against it. Winter taught me to clench and shrink. Summer taught me to blush into dampness and be careful in thunderstorms. when the window wanted to remember how to be a mouth. Eventually they moved. People do that. The last unbroken thing came down one more time before the boxes went onto a borrowed truck. She looked at my circle and at the black patch at its center, where candle heat had bitten the stone. She said the boy's name quietly, and then she said, "Thank you." And a single tear fell onto my edge and changed nothing I could feel and everything she could. New feet learned the stair. The house inhaled a family that did not mind a crack in the dining room wall because their last place had grown mushrooms behind the stove. A man who laughed like someone who learned to laugh late. A woman who put her ear to the radiator each winter morning and said, "It's working. It's working." The child who ran in a circle upstairs that did not match mine and carried 2 plastic horses everywhere so they would not be lonely. They did not know I was there. The father stacked boxes in the damp corner and covered me with a rug that had once liked a summer porch. The mother hung coats on nails driven into brick. They stored the usual half-finished promises, an elliptical machine, a guitar with 3 strings, jars of nails, a bicycle learning dust. Sometimes at night, the furnace forgot itself and became a throat again. Sometimes the river under the street laughed where it shouldn't. Sometimes the drain in the far corner gurgled a name that wasn't the boy's. The pressure on the other side of me changed flavor. It tasted the new names in the house. It tried them on, one by one. I knew what waited, and I held. The storm worked the basement window loose. Rain came in, a traveler that had never learned to wipe its feet. It ran down the wall and spread across me as if I were a road. For a moment, I remembered I was only salt. I gathered myself anyway, thickening where I thinned, like a body throwing white blood cells at a wound. The father laid a towel along the baseboard. "Not this week," he muttered. The dehumidifier taught the room a new note. The rain left. I held, but less cleanly. The child grew. 13 found her with a new kind of restlessness. One afternoon she pulled the rug back and saw my circle. "What's this?" she asked, tracing my edge. "Some old mess," her mother called down. "Don't touch it." She touched it anyway. "Portal," she decided softly. She set a candle on the black patch at my center, and to no one in particular, suggested that if anything was going to come out, it should do it before her mother got home. She poured new salt from a box with a different brand that promised an easy pour side spout. She tried to patch my thinned places. The new grains lay on me like frost on old snow. The candle learned bravery in her hand. She learned some from the candle. "Hello," she said. At first, the air answered like a house settling into autumn. Then the pressure shifted. The furnace throat cleared without heat. The drain smiled with its wet teeth. The flame bent toward my center. then toward the girl's breath. I tasted in the air a name I hadn't tasted in years. It wore other names behind it, like borrowed coats. It tried the girl's name and liked the way it moved through the room. "Stop," she said, because something inside her recognized being called from behind the line. She blew out the candle and clapped a hand over the sit mark as if to cover its mouth. Then she ran upstairs and shut the basement door and sat with her back against it until the phone rang and ordinary life pushed in. But something had become impatient. Grief can sleep for years. Hunger doesn't. On an autumn night in their second year in the house, the basement door did not latch. It swung nearly shut and stayed that way. A draft from the kitchen found the gap and went exploring, slipping down the stairs until it found me. It moved over my edge instead of around it. That is how air says your name. Pressure gathered on the far side, arranging itself like a person at a threshold. The drain whispered. The furnace throat hummed. The window weighed its loyalties. "You have kept me," the pressure said. "Yes," I answered, in the soft scrape of grain against grain. Because she asked. I meant the sparrow-boned girl from the river's year. And because you pressed. "You could let me," it said. "I could," I said, "but not should." "You are tired," it observed. It was right. The dehumidifier chose that moment to switch off. Without its hum, everything went soft. The draft licked along my edge. In a place where old salt, new salt, and storm damage met, my grains rolled. Not the whole circle, just enough. I broke. The bulb above me, worn thin by years of vigilance, popped and went dark. Basement darkness is heavier than other kinds. It presses back. Something stepped across me without feet. The room felt the steps anyway. At the top of the stairs, the not quite closed door eased wider. The house rose a fraction as pressure shifted, the way a chest does when it gives up a held breath. The father woke. He lay still for a moment, listening to a quiet that had changed key, then got up and padded down the hallway. At the head of the stairs he hesitated, hand on the banister. "Hello?" he called, catching the word in his mouth like something he wasn't sure he should release. The pressure regarded him the way a river regards a rock. It could go around. It could go through. Instead, it leaned. A small, familiar kindness brushed his shoulder, the way someone you love might do in a kitchen in late afternoon. He said his sister's name without knowing why. He said it like an apology. He took one step down, another. The pressure flowed past him because it could. Cold slid over his chest like waist-deep water. His hand tightened on the rail. "No," he said, and then, "Please." He followed. The hallway nightlight threw a shallow pool of gold. In the child's doorway, The two plastic horses stood as if on guard. The pressure reached the threshold and tasted the room. Paper, shampoo, the thin metal tang of half-grown fear. It moved toward the bed. The nightlight brightened, or seemed to. The horses toppled onto their sides. The air thickened above the sleeping girl. She frowned, caught in a dream she would never quite remember. From the other bedroom came a cough, small and sharp. The pressure tilted toward that sound too, splitting itself, greedy and uncertain. The father stepped into the room and did the only thing he knew. He put himself between. "I'm here," he said. No bargain, no spell. Just that. The pressure leaned against him. Cold climbed his spine. His teeth ached as if from river water. Memory surfaced. An old corridor. A phone ringing. The night he'd decided, wrongly, was his fault. He whispered, "I'm sorry," and meant it for everything he had kept and everything he had lost. For a long second, nothing moved. Then the weight in the room thinned. Not gone. Spread. The air let go of its grip on the girl's lungs. The cough down the hall dissolved into ordinary sleep. The nightlight settled back into its small, steady halo. The pressure did not vanish. Rivers do not vanish. They change where you are not looking. Dawn took the basement in slow grey stripes. The bulb above me stayed dead. The break in my circle remained a break. You cannot stare a wound closed. You can only choose again. Later, cereal, coffee, backpacks. The father came down with the girl to fetch a box for a school project. The rug at the bottom of the stairs was crooked. The girl tugged it aside and saw my edge, and the thin, dirty gap where I had failed. "What is it?" she asked, studying the circle with a quiet curiosity. "Old mess," the father said. He stayed on the step above, looking. "Do we fix it?" she asked. He nearly shrugged, nearly said, "It doesn't matter," nearly turned away. Instead, he went up to the kitchen and came back with a new box of salt. The side spout promised easy pouring in bright blue letters. He stood there a long moment at my broken place, the box heavy in his hand. This is the part no paperback ever tells you. The pause is the protection, the thought before the pour, the choice. He opened the spout. The greens fell like a small snow, like the first sincere apology after the loud one. The new salt did not know me yet, but wanted to learn. It slid into the gap, rough and crooked and earnest. The girl knelt and nudged it with one finger until the circle looked whole enough to trust for one more night. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. The house listened and laid that word along its joists and into its pipes and down into the drain that still thought of the river as a rumor of religion. Beyond me, the pressure waited with its good manners and patient hunger. It always will. I remain. This is a thing a line can do. I will hold as long as there is a voice in the house that says, "It's working, it's working," and another that says, "I'm here." I will hold as long as a hand pauses above me, box of salt hovering, and the pause is long enough to be called love. And when I break again, as all things do, I will remember these names. I will remember the last unbroken things, thank you, and the boy in the river, and the river after the boy. I will make my failure a kind of gate that requires saying please to pass. Name me anyway, even if it is impolite to name what you cannot hold. I am the line between. I am the circle that knows who you are when you cross.
They didn't summon anything in that basement. No monsters, no demons, just memory, and the kind of grief that doesn't knock, it waits. And what kept it out wasn't holy water or incantations or anything you'd find in a book with too many bookmarks. It was salt, poured by a trembling hand, held grain by people who meant it. That's the real kind of protection, not the big flashy kind, the slow, exhausting kind, the kind you redraw when it rains, the kind you choose again and again, even when it would be easier to forget. And when the line finally broke, no flames, no screams, just possibility. That's all it takes. A moment, a gap. The world leans a little, and something notices. But the next morning, a hand poured salt again. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be, because the act of protecting someone, really protecting them, isn't a miracle. It's a decision, one you make tired, quiet, repeated. And if you're lucky, that's enough to hold the line until morning. But not every story ends with protection. Next week on Murderous Tongues, a jingle plays, the truck turns the corner, and the melody that meant summer means something else entirely. Because some stories don't take you by force, they wait for you to follow. Tune in for episode 13, The Song That Knows Your Name. Midnight listeners, I'm Nora Vale, and remember, monsters don't always knock. Sometimes they hum. Sometimes they wait for you to forget. Draw your line, keep your light on, and if you have to go looking, well, don't go alone. Sleep light.